I'm here in Rome, outside the Palazzo di Propaganda Fide. It's the home of the Sacred Congregation for the Propagation of the Faith, which Pope Gregory XV created in 1622. The organization targeted what the Vatican saw as the schismatics in the East, the Orthodox, and the heretics in the North, the Protestants. The aim was to bring them back into the Catholic fold. Whether or not the English knew about Propaganda Fide, the idea of it was their very fear. The belief that this place, the Vatican, was secretly plotting to drag England back into Catholicism was a widespread conspiracy theory. Propaganda Fide was certainly active during Charles I's reign, and as Carol Hibbard points out, it led the Vatican here to woo the Archbishop of Canterbury with a cardinalship in 1633 in the hopes that he'd convert. Now, all of this was happening in a rapidly changing information ecosystem, one that Charles seemed very ill-prepared for. I'm Alicia Wanless, and you're listening to an episode of The Information Animal, a podcast drawing on a book of the same name. For anyone new to this series, you should expect wildly mismatched AI-generated imagery in the video version. And if you're just listening, well, here's hoping my voice is entertaining enough. Back to our scheduled programming. If you don't know who I'm talking about, allow me to introduce the OG King Charles. He is a deeply flawed person, never meant to govern, but for his brother's death. He inherits new and growing colonies from his father, King James, who chartered the Virginia Company, which in turn spawns a class of rich merchants who increasingly enter public life. Charles is also just the second person to rule England, Scotland, and Ireland. Now, these are still very separate countries, but they still impact each other, as we'll see. James also ends a war with Spain, resulting in an exodus of aristocrats to the continent for the first time in generations, including Charles, who heads to Spain in a disastrous attempt to find a wife. This all helps open the information ecosystem up to a wider information environment. And in flows the information as a result, not maybe always the most helpful kind. By the time Charles comes to power in 1625, Europe is gripped by the 30 Years' War between Protestants and Catholics. Propaganda pamphlets flow in to agitate the English Protestants to support their continental brethren. These pamphlets spread a conspiracy theory that the Vatican is leading a global effort to drag England back into the Catholic faith, which it kind of was. But what's worse, the Pope is actually the Antichrist. This sort of propaganda resonates with a group of ultra-religious Protestants in England, pejoratively called the godly.
Elaborate vestments and superstitious rituals reek of Rome,
who feel the Reformation there never went far enough. The godly constantly petition their monarchs to make more reforms.
Please, your majesty, do better.
Even publishing a pamphlet playbook to help others get in on the advocacy. Now, these petitions and pamphlets have a wider market thanks to the Reformation. After all, Protestants believe in a more direct engagement with the Bible, which requires literacy. In fact, the Bible becomes a great place to keep the popish fears alive, drawing on past events. That Spanish Armada in 1588, or the Catholic-led plot to blow up Parliament and Charles's father in 1605, these are still living on in memory. In fact, they still do. The English burn effigies of Guy Fawkes to this very day every November 5th. So now, more people than ever before can read in Charles's England, including apprentices who must be literate to enter a trade. But there are also more people in general, because the English population just returns to pre-Black Death numbers around Charles's reign. Now, this is great for the domestic printing market, which is finally taking off after a slow start. That pesky domestic paper industry really lagged. But these printers have a business model problem. They want to make more money, so they print what people want, which is often low-quality content that doesn't really encourage much sound reasoning. Let's call this information pollution. They publish what sells, horror stories about human deformities, monsters, and murders, things that induce fear and anger, things that spread. Never has it been easier to print as fast and as much as they can print now. These pamphlets start to respond to each other in what feels like real time. Arguments over religious reforms play out in them, as do satirical responses about those arguments, and complaints about the godly's imposition on wider society. Handwritten newsletters are still a major feature of information flow, but now the first newspapers in the form of Courantos emerge. And of course, we have books in such newfound plenty that Richard Burton complains about the chaos and confusion of them, how they hurt his eyes from reading and fingers from turning pages. There's just so much information, nobody can possibly process it. In this changing information ecosystem comes Charles, inept and petulant. He pisses both the Parliament and merchants off by imposing heavy taxes, of the like suggesting he'd deprive people of property or freedom without justification, rights they've had since the Magna Carta. Instead of accepting their complaints and due rights, Charles throws a tantrum.
It is an outrage. A complete and utter farce. I will not stand for it, do you hear me? I simply will not stand for it.
And dismisses Parliament for more than a decade. Fake it as that divine-ordained despot until you make it, right?
Зови нас просто царь Карл.
He forces the gentry to go manage their estates instead of living in London, further cutting him off from that feedback loop between him and the people. He alienates the gentry more by surrounding himself with favorites.
It is the divine right of me, myself, and I.
Charles goes on to fuel the apocalyptic fears of the godly by marrying a French Catholic.
Do not worry, my dear, you can keep your faith now.
Merci, mon roi.
Letting her practice her faith pretty publicly, and then making religious reforms that seem, well, very Catholic to the godly. In Scotland, he pushes his new prayer book, and the Protestant zealots there go next level, rioting in a church, pumping propaganda into England to provoke the godly, and ultimately going to war with the king. And the situation just spirals. The parliamentarians cajole the literate public to petition the king. They agitate the apprentices to protest and riot.
Open the gates! We demand justice! Down with the oppressors!
These apprentices are basically incels who can't marry until age 24. There's a lot of pent-up rage. Meanwhile, Charles does what a lot of leaders feeling threatened might do. He tries to control the flow of information, often using the court of the Star Chamber to do so. It's not very democratic. For example, after a complaint from the Spanish ambassador, Charles bans all Corantos.
Get rid of these infernal Corantos!
And he makes it illegal to spread rumors and slander about him and his wife. In one infamous episode, Charles has the executioner publicly burn a book critiquing theatrical plays because his wife loved to stage them, and then he has the ears of the author, William Prynne, cut off. Charles controls the number of printing presses in England and the volume of editions that are printed. But, try as he might, he can't stem the flow of propaganda from abroad, like Scotland, or domestic politicians, like the godly and parliamentarians, from using it for their own gain. Yet at the same time, Duke goes and opens up the first postal system in 1635, which helps move information around the country faster. Popish plots flood the information ecosystem. Dozens of Catholic conspiracies are in the press in late 1641, early 1642 with the returns of Parliament. Things like a French fleet raise panic, and people say the Queen is planning to overthrow the king with financing from the Pope. These outlandish conspiracies surge in response to events like the introduction of the Book of Common Prayer in Scotland, the dissolution of the Short Parliament, and the Irish Rebellion, to name a few. Like today, scandals, plots, and impending doom attract readership in an information ecosystem where instability and concerns for the future are clearly present, something we're likely to see a lot more of. And for their part, Charles and his supporters wake up very late in the information competition with the parliamentarians and godly of all stripes. They gift the world Cavalier poetry about honor, sexuality, drinking, and whatnot.
Gather ye rosebuds while ye may.
The antithesis of the godly propaganda. Long story short, it didn't work, and Charles lost his head. Now, in case I put you to sleep with my love of details, here's the TLDR. Across this case study, and most of those in my book, the information ecosystem in question experienced the following shifts. 1. In resources. Economic shifts led to a new class of merchants creating conditions to support innovation and the parliamentarians. 2. In tools, new innovations changed how information was processed and distributed, from paper to print to the postal service, increasing the volume of outputs and the speed and distance at which they could be moved. In demographics, more people engaged in the growing public sphere thanks to literacy, population growth, and an opening of the English information ecosystem. And 4, also in outputs. A new idea emerged challenging an existing one, obviously the Reformation, but also in many ways Charles pushing absolutism. And the reaction to that created new ideas around the public sphere. This then sparked an information competition between two communities who sought to have the public adopt their worldviews, the godly and the Cavaliers, broadly speaking, among others. These factors changed in the lead up to the English Civil War, as they did before the Peloponnesian War, the American Civil War, the fight for Vietnamese independence, and Russia's first invasion of Ukraine. Why does this matter now? Many democracies worldwide, like Canada, have been experiencing similar shifts. There's widespread global economic uncertainty, making it harder for people to cope with changes in the information ecosystem. For example, Canadians experiencing financial hardship are more likely to have lower trust in public institutions, and over 2/3 have low levels of trust in news media. New innovations are changing how information is processed and distributed, starting with cable TV, ushering in that wonderful 24/7 news cycle, followed by the internet, social media, and now AI. These innovations have come in a much more rapid succession than did writing, print, the telegraph, or even radio. What's also different is that most governments outside the US have little control over new means like social media. More people engage in politics on social media. At the same time, adult literacy levels in countries like Canada are challenged. And the demographics are changing. 23% of the population is now immigrants. That's the highest since Confederation. These are facts our neighbors like to exploit. New ideas around social rights challenge conservative views, and the information competition between them, at least in Canada, has only been tempered by Trump's interference. But this is all happening while our local and independent media are dying, and 2.5 million Canadians have almost no local news. What's more, we have Canadians so exposed to the American information ecosystem that they've confused their laws with ours. For example, in one court case of a protester in Ottawa a couple of years ago, the defendant's surety cited the First Amendment to the US Constitution as his right, as a Canadian. So it's this interplay between factors, between people, the tools they use, the outputs they consume, in relation to surrounding conditions like the economy, that's why we need to study the information ecosystem as a system and not just focus on singular parts within it. You can learn more about information ecology as well as information ecosystems and competition within them in my book, The Information Animal: Humans, Technology, and the Competition for Reality. Thank you for listening to the Information Animal podcast. The working plan is to produce a few foundational episodes on information ecology before coming back to more case studies and interviews with other researchers. So be sure to follow.